this was one of them for me. As Don's bike hit the ramp, you could see the suspension on his front wheel violently bottoming out. There was an instant change of his expression too, as the bike catapulted violently off the ramp. Now at this point, we have the actual photo that Eaglebeak took at this moment in time that Rob kept actually, and he sent it to me at some point. And okay, so here we are again. We've actually been off, had some lunch, played some squash, and there's a few hours passed since last time, so we'll have another look at some interesting excerpts from the book. Well, the ones that I'm interested particularly are the ones involving me. As I've said before though, this is a very good book, recommend it to everybody. Lots of other stuff other than the Don bits, but we're talking about Don bits today. Now this story, this event is one that I'm a bit sketchy about. I remember parts of it. I'm calling it the proxy war with Germany, because there was a German immigrant couple that came and moved into a house a couple of doors down from me. And there was an incident involving that family that Robert refers to in the book here. So, all in all, we got off to a good start with the Germans. It should have stayed that way, but things took an unfortunate turn for the worse. The turn for the worse came when Don and I were a little bored one day and we spotted a council van parked on the nature strip opposite the home of our new German neighbours. It was one of those little vans that looked slightly larger than a toilet on wheels, and which in fact may have been just that. Out of a sense of mischief, we decided to let one of the tyres down on the van. One of those small, thoughtless acts of vandalism that must drive the council blokes nuts. Using a small twig to push down on the little brass pin in the valve, the escaping air made a satisfying sound as the van began to list to starboard like a torpedoed ship. Then we spotted the eldest son of the immigrant family striding earnestly towards us. The young man, who was probably in his early 20s and who we'll call Gunter, had hair that was already thinning and was certainly the most serious of the bunch. He came over to where we were hiding and by the side of the van and told us in his strong accent to desist in our attempts at vandalism. We tried acting innocent by denying any wrongdoing, and the moment he returned to the house, we were back at our childish act of sabotage. No doubt, having watched us from behind the curtains, the young man was back out onto us in a flash. He told us that if we didn't get lost, he would ring the council or the police and have them deal with us. Knowing he had us licked, we abandoned our mission, but not before giving him a little cheek in return. He, for his part, was probably a little taken aback that we had the hide to answer back, and we, for our part, were convinced that telling us off was one thing, but threatening to dob us in was quite another. Ratting on your neighbours to the authorities might have been considered being civic-minded in their old world, but to Don and me at the time this seemed very un-Australian. Very foolishly and on historically thin grounds, Don and I decided that this amounted to casus belli. I don't know what that is, Rob. You'll have to explain that. Obviously some Latin thing. Haven't looked it up. You can look it up. No. Anyway, C-A-S-U-S-B-E-L-L-I. What's that, Rob? With regard to the German surrender of 1945, all bets were now off. We immediately went into a war footage and began drawing up battle plans. Like battle-hardened veterans, we instinctively knew that this would be a war of nerves and attrition. My friend Pete's flair for guerrilla warfare would have definitely been an asset in this situation like this, but Pete appeared to have outgrown his young rebellious streak by now and was more focused on his education and learning a useful set of maritime skills in the Sea Scouts. Don and I would have to wage this war alone. Taking a lesson from history books, we began our war with antagonistic manoeuvres designed to provoke the enemy. Amongst Don's numerous obscure possessions was a homemade full-size Nazi flag of the Third Reich. It was actually made out of a bed sheet. I do remember making this thing and not really having any useful purpose for it up until now. It's just a white bed sheet with black paint on it. Very convincing, though. I think I was going to make it a pirate flag, but I wasn't sure what kind of flags pirates had, so I just made it a Nazi flag. Anyway, For the next couple of hours, Don and I rode our bikes up and down the street in front of their house, taking it in turns to fly the flag and doing our best Hitler salutes. Sounds like something out of Fawlty Towers, doesn't it? With "Don't mention the war," the John Cleese stuff. Anyway, that was extremely insensitive behaviour, is quite obvious, although it didn't seem too obvious to us at the time. Apart from the provocation to any decent German people, given the ages of the grown children, it was highly likely their father had been one of the war's many casualties. I don't know what exactly we hoped to achieve with our assault on these poor folk, but we were certainly trying to get a raise out of them. No doubt passing off our actions for the ignorant behaviour it was, they remained inside the house and didn't give us the satisfaction of a response. The next day they made a fateful decision to paint the corrugated iron roof of their house, and Don and I made an equally fateful decision to try and sabotage their efforts. The whole family spent the morning up on the roof with tins of paint and brushes, and by early afternoon, with the job complete, they retired inside to presumably put their feet up and escape a little of the summer heat. From Don's backyard, we decided it was time to seriously up the ante, and we went into action, lobbing the sticky yellow fruit from the loquat tree over the roof of the intervening house between Don's and the Germans and onto the newly painted roof. Not satisfied that this was producing suitably damaging results, we switched to dry clods of dirt that disintegrated on impact. Crouched behind the 6-foot paling fence, we pulled the pins from our imaginary hand grenades and lobbed them high over no man's land and into the German trenches. When one hit the tin roof, it produced a satisfying sound. We could almost feel the ground shake. Don and I felt like Anzacs, and I could hardly wait for Anzac Day. We braced ourselves for some anticipated salvos in return, but somewhat disappointingly they never came. The Germans weren't rising immediately to the bait. Small clods became bigger clods. Grenades gave way to howitzers and artillery shells. We continued with intermittent shelling, satisfied that we must have done some considerable confusion and panic in the German line, behind the German lines. We thought that maybe they hadn't quite figured out exactly the origin of the ordnance that was falling out of the sky. Then we suddenly heard Gunter call out in his heavy accent across no man's land that we had better cut it out if we knew what was good for us. He may have mentioned the police again. In view of this development, we decided that we would call a temporary halt to the hostilities. Late in the afternoon, as an uneasy silence settled over the trenches, I headed home. As the German neighbour's house was literally 2 houses west of Don's place, we might have said all was quiet on the Western Front. Okay, less than half an hour later, I sort of remember bits and pieces of this, but it's good of you to put it all together again for me, Rob. Anyway, less than half an hour later, I was watching a little television with my sister Linda, came out and told me that Dad wanted to see me outside. Seeing her expression that I might be in a little hot water, I had a sinking feeling that this might have something to do with the afternoon's activities, and I had this confirmed as soon as I walked around the back corner of the house to see Dad in earnest conversation with the German mother at the front gate. Dad called me immediately over and made me stand there and listen as the good woman ran through the extensive litany of our war crimes. "Did you throw plums and dirt onto the wet paint on Mrs. Goodweaver's roof?" Dad asked me when we had finished. I wasn't there, so I didn't actually know about this. I don't think I got any consequences from this at all. Not that I can remember, anyway. Anyway, "I suppose," I answered, very hangdog. "Well, did you?" he asked again. "Yes, Dad." "And did you ride up and down the street with a flag with a swastika on it?" Yes, Dad." "Well, what do you have to say to Mrs. Goodweaver?" "I'm very sorry, Mrs. Goodweaver," I answered, finding it difficult to look the lady in the eye. Being brought face to face with one of the victims of my crimes was very sobering. Mrs. Goodweaver was also a pleasant lady, and all said and done, and who, prior to the war, had never so much as given me an ill look. She was tall like her children, a little serious perhaps, but her manner and bearing marked her as a very much a lady and very European. I suspect that in her youth she would have been quite striking. Throwing dirt on the newly painted roof was bad enough, Mrs. Goodweaver repeated for my benefit, but riding up and down in front of our house with a Nazi flag was very upsetting for her family and for her and her family. She explained that German people found this very offensive. Being German did not make them Nazis, she added, and the Nazis were very bad people. Mrs. Goodweaver looked between Dad and I as she made her point, and I suspect she may have thought that the household harboured some anti-German sentiments. After having to promise that this behaviour would not happen again, and before being sent inside in shame, I felt the sharp flick of Dad's backhand across my ear. I can't say in retrospect that I didn't deserve it. Dad remained at the front gate for a few minutes, chatting to Mrs. Goodweaver over the front gate and doing his best to mend fences and the severely strained international relations. Although this put an immediate end to and permanent end to all hostilities, my relationship with the German neighbours was never quite the same after this. It may have been a mere coincidence, but long after our weekend declaration of war, the Goodweavers also came into possession of a dog, which soon established itself as a fearsome defender of their house and home. To enter their property without invitation would have been just plain suicide. Just walking past the front gate was fraught with danger, as the dog considered the street in front of their house a part of their rightful territory. In time, at least 2 people who failed to observe this fact felt that its teeth sink into their calf muscles. There was talk of the dog being put down, but somehow the Goodweavers managed to outflank the lynch mob. So what do you think of that? Were you on the side of the Germans, or would you be on the side of the Aussies in this?
The Germans, you assholes. I can't believe that you would do that. That is horrible.
I think I kind of agree with you. I'm thinking if something like that happened to me as an adult with people, in fact, I think they were probably quite restrained.
I think they were. I would have killed you little fuckers. Honest to God.
And I don't, as I say, I don't remember ever being told off or being held to account for it in any way. I might have, but that's not something I remember. So, yeah, I think I probably should have had some consequences from that. And I'm sorry, Goodweavers. It's unlikely that you'll be watching this, but if you are, here's my apology. Okay. Now this story is about a summer when Rob's family didn't go to Boyd Town, as it was it turned out to be. And so that was great for me, because I had a mate to hang out with during the holidays, which I normally didn't. So the summer we stayed at home, was what it was called, and what a sacrifice we felt we were making. But my mate Don, who unfortunately never got to go on family summer holidays, saw this turn of events as a positive thing, and we did our best to make the days pass eventfully, with the odd bit of incendiary experimentation or shooting at everything which moved, and many things which didn't, with our homemade and lovingly crafted gings, or Shanghais known to the rest of the world. The street lamp outside Don's house looked as if it had been sprayed from underneath with a burst from a machine gun. The councilmen who replaced the fluorescent tubes inside it with increasing frequency eventually put 2 and 2 together, and the word was passed down to us wayward lads via a knock on Don's front door that whoever was behind the vandalism ought to think twice before doing it again, and we took the hint. I certainly remember taking pot shots and all sorts of things, hurting the street light.
Vandals, wouldn't you? You little shits. I bet your kids would not have been allowed to do that stuff.
Well, I think we were fairly typical of kids at that time in history. I mean, we didn't do really destructive. I mean, there were people, smashing up phone boxes and toilets and doing all that. We didn't do anything like that. The worst thing we did was a street light bulb or 2. That's about as far as it ever went.
A few trees and the...
Yeah, but that was collateral damage. That wasn't deliberate.
Collateral damage does not count.
This is really the only deliberate thing. But I do remember Robert had a much better slingshot than me, because his dad was a plumber, and he, instead of a wooden sort of Y-frame, which mine was, with stretchy rubber, which we actually cut up bike tubes. You can cut up push bike tubes and loop them together to get a really good sort of spring effect. Anyway, he was able to replace the timber with plumber's wire steel, and you got a lot of extra spring out of it if it had this spring handle, and then you'd sort of wrap it up with tape and all sorts of things. So his had a much better range and accuracy. And I remember it was a great day because he actually helped me make one myself. So we both ended up with the better model eventually. So that was very good of you, Rob. Thanks for helping me make my better Shanghai there. Anyway, where were we? So yeah, put two and two together, and whoever was behind that vandalism should think twice before doing it again, and we took the hint. Our gigs were powered by a few layered of powered rubber bands, oh here we go, with a leather receptacle or launcher in the middle, and a padded and tapered grip, usually built from a framework of either wood, in Don's case, or a bronze welding rod in mine. Put simply, they were lethal toys. Another of the lethal weapons we devised during summer by ways of skirting boredom were blowguns fashioned from hollowed out bamboo. The darts were made of paper shaped into a small cone, and onto which a pin was dropped through at the pointing end and jammed into place in with a wad of sticky tape behind the head of the pin. I think we used to do that with pens as well. You'd take the pen thing out of a biro, and that made a good tube, for firing these things through. You never did anything like that, I guess?
No, we had pussy willow fights.
Oh, tell us about that. What's that?
Well, it's a willow, and it's...
Willow, as in the willow branch of a tree.
And the pussy willow is the soft, furry bud. And you'd break them all off and you'd ping them at each other. And if you got a good arm, they could really hurt.
Were they quite heavy, were they?
Yeah, we used to fire those.
Oh, okay. When you say fire them, you just threw them?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but you could just run out and just go rip a few more off the tree.
And did you ever get into trouble for that, or
no?
Ever do anybody any damage?
Not really. Yeah, I've been welt here and there.
There you go. That's pretty much on par.
No, pins. You assholes.
Okay, this is sort of moving forward a bit in time now, where music started to take over in our lives with Elvis and the Beatles and all that kind of stuff. And
did you guys play sport?
Well, both Robert and I were pretty hopeless at team sports. We were both pretty uncoordinated, and as he says in his book, he was same as me. Whenever they had, sort of cricket matches and things, and captains would pick people, we were always, the last to be picked. Or if they had to pick us, they'd put us in some really remote part of the field where the ball would never come, and we would never have to do anything. But that was fine because I never really. I was never really any good at it, didn't like it. But having said that, I quite like other sports as I got older. As you know, I used to play squash, and we still do. So, competition squash with rackets and all sorts. Okay, tennis. But team sports, no. But you were a big team sport person, weren't you?
Yeah, I played everything. And athletics and swimming and not tennis and not squash and not badminton and not table tennis.
But yours were what? Netball, basketball?
Netball, basketball, touch footy.
And you were a ref at something, weren't you?
Basketball, international referee.
International referee?
Yes, I know.
And didn't you, because you were too good for the chicks, didn't you play with the boys in something?
At athletics. At primary school and high school. Well, I went to an all-girls high school, but primary school, the girls were too slow, so I used to race against the boys and beat them. They really hated that. Same with swimming.
I can imagine, but with the sport it was the girls' teams.
Yeah.
Okay, well I never did any of that. Anyway, Don and I took ourselves to the movies to see Elvis strutting his stuff in Roustabout, where Elvis showcased his amazing acting skills by playing a character who looks and acts like Elvis.
He's being facetious, isn't he? Because he's a shit actor.
I don't know. Well, I suppose there wasn't much required of him. He only had to sing and have fights, and that was about it.
Yeah, no.
But yeah, there wasn't much required there. Anyway, riding his Honda, getting into the odd punch-up and becoming a singing star in a touring carnival and sweeping all the girls off their feet with songs like Little Egypt, came out strutting, wearing nothing but a button and a bow, whoa, whoa, whoa. Anyway, Don and I started the serious business of saving for our first motorbikes and walking around with our collars turned up for a week or two and practicing those brooding Elvis looks in the mirror and saying stuff in our reflection like, "Are you looking for trouble?" Yeah, I suppose we did that.
I'm surprised you guys survived.
Elvis's fame was massive. I remember there was a problem for Elvis. He was sort of losing popularity to the Beatles because he was a rocker, and people with the teddy boy haircuts and everything followed the Elvis thing. And coming in behind him were the Mersey people, which were the Beatles and people from England, and they all had like Beatles kind of haircuts without the brill cream, and there was like two factions of people running around, mods and rockers. Did you have mods and rockers?
No.
I would have been past. They would have all died out.
I would have been too young.
Yeah, the rockers were pretty much extinct by the 70s. There's still a few hardcore ones floating around, but
No, I don't remember them.
anyway, I only had about a week as a rocker. I tried it for a week and then went straight to being a mod. I think Rob hung in there with the rocker thing for a bit longer than me. Anyway, Elvis's fame was massive. He was the king after all, and we could never imagine anybody rivaling that fame, yet happened it did. And around the time the Beatles thing took off, we took proud possession of the family's first record player. Pop music didn't, of course, begin with the Beatles, it just felt like it did. Trying to explain the kind of impact they had for a teenager in the 60s to those of a latter generation isn't all that easy. There isn't much in the way of comparisons to that kind of phenomenon. I honestly doubt they could have made a much bigger impact if they'd arrived from outer space in a psychedelic spaceship. When they exploded into our lives in the early 60s, Dad said they're 9-day wonders. It wasn't one of his best predictions. He did much better when he said to us many times, the future of the world is in electronics. Ain't that the truth? Our new and very fast first record player was a small portable mono, neatly packaged in brown vinyl. I went straight out and used my paper round money to buy two of my favourite singles at the time, Petula Clark's Downtown and Concrete and the Clay by a band called Orwellian, with the Orwellian sounding name of Unit 4+2. I don't even remember them. Certainly remember Petula Clark. Anyway, Don got his first record player a month or two later, but it was twice the size and a stereo. For months afterwards, I would have to put up with little comments about the superior sound of stereo versus mono.
You know, he still does that, Rob. It's very annoying.
What do you mean I still do that?
Oh, you still go on about the quality of the sound and who cares?
Well,
You do.
and video and stuff. I know about sound. I suppose I do. Yeah, okay, fair enough. You're probably right.
I was going to fight.
No, I used to sell that stuff. I used to sell speakers and microphones and things, so, I knew my sound and audio stuff quite well, and so...
Oh, good on you, but who cares?
Okay, well, I like stuff that sounds good. Anyway, little comments about the superior sound of stereo versus mono, and in fact, Don just point-blank refused to listen to anything on a substandard piece of equipment after a short while. There were days when we really hated each other. Oh... Anyway, as Beatlemania went around the world like the Spanish flu, Don and I, along with at least a billion others, vied for #1 fan status. But to give Don his due, he pretty much edged me out. Somebody told him he bore a passing resemblance to John Lennon. What do you think? John Lennon?
No.
You don't think so? I've got some older photos here. Hang on. See what you think. I found to go with this story.
Well, he's a little bony at the moment. Young John.
Here we go. Here's Don with one of his motorbikes. John Lennon?
No. No.
What do we think, people? Is there a John Lennon there? That's me at about 17 or something, 18 maybe?
No.
Okay. There's me at a younger age. Look how cute I was.
Well, actually, you were.
That's from my school photo. It's just me cropped out of my school photo.
Actually, John Lennon. Yes.
Oh, John Lennon in the school photo one.
Yeah.
I think I was about 15 there. Oh, who's this? This would be the Easy Riders guy.
Peter Honda.
Peter Honda, yeah. This is me on my motorbike.
No, that's terrible.
Peter
shot.
Honda, what do you reckon, Rob? I know, I was a big fan of Peter Honda. Now, if you look closely there, that motorbike has only got one rear vision mirror, and you'll see there's a story about me losing a rear vision mirror and a indicator in a very tragic event. So that photo must have been taken, I think, after that particular incident. Bit of a hottie, hey? Anyway, back to the story. Somebody told him he bore a resemblance to John Lennon, and he didn't mind a bit. His fringe suddenly grew longer, and even on a day when it was 90 in the shade, he could still be seen wearing his beetle boots. A beetle boot was an ankle-high, elastic-sided boot with pointy toes. I totally screwed my shoes with those.
Your feet.
In my feet, yeah. I used to wear beetle boots all the time. In fact, if you can see how much...
No, don't show the world that, Don.
But see how the toes go like that?
Yeah, I know.
That's from the beetle boots.
That's disgusting. It's because they were too small.
Or you had to have them really tight to have the look, and they had to come into a sharp point.
Look you've got now. You've got monged feet.
Yeah, well, okay. Well, it's a legacy from my teenage days that never really corrected itself. No. Maybe that's why I was so bad at sport, because that would make you a bit unco, I suppose.
I think you'd know about sport before you were a teenager.
Okay, this is all about our motorbike times, which I guess never really left me, because I've still got a motorbike down there in the garage, a nice motorbike. Actually, there was a period where, a couple of decades where I didn't have one. Right. Pete and Charlie had discovered cars. Pete would eventually begin racing them in his spare time. For Don and me, the need for distraction evolved into the world of motorbikes and speed. I bought my first motorbike at 17, and Don bought a new Suzuki a short time later. Adolescence eventually had dimmed Don's pyromania and his fascination with the explosive properties of petrol, now replaced with another equally lethal and petrol-fueled fascination. For months we drove the neighbours crazy, with afternoons spent putting our machines through their paces on a nearby vacant double block right next to the English neighbours with the hyphenated name, who I had never really forgiven for hijacking my kookaburra. That's another story earlier on in the book. Must read the book for the kookaburra story, very good. They, for their part, had never forgiven me for raiding their almond tree, so their protests about the noise of motorbikes was loud and frequent. We also made ramps on the nature strip across the road from our house, which we would hit at speed to experience the delight of becoming momentarily airborne. Once again, it was Don who provided the best entertainment with his genetically inbuilt love of living dangerously. That's not me now, is it? There's no need for speed or danger about me anymore, is there?
I think there may be.
I remember when Merrill and I first started dating, I've got quite a good motorbike. I've always had fairly good motorbikes, and I just assumed that all chicks love roaring around on the back of motorbikes at stupid speeds. And so our first few dates involved me trying to pull like a 6 or 7 G-force acceleration with you on the back of the motorbike. Now, you never complained, so I just assumed that you were loving every second of it. But you did confess at some point later that it wasn't your best form of entertainment, is that right?
That's right. I'm surprised that I lasted as long as I did.
So why didn't you say something at the time?
Well, I thought you were just being an idiot.
Well, I thought because you weren't saying anything, I needed to go harder and do more and make it more impressive.
I'm surprised you're still alive.
But I can remember how shocked I was when you said, I'm not really into this, zooming around at a 120k thing. So
yeah, no.
Okay, well, again, sorry about that. I got that wrong.
Yeah, you're not really sorry.
But it was fun. Well, I had fun. One of us had fun.
Yeah, it's like the roller coasters done.
Anyway, as the ramps we constructed became marginally higher and longer, so did the speed with which we hit them. A brick under the end of a plank became 2, and so on. Though through trial and error we found that it was unwise beyond a certain point to increase the height of the ramp without also increasing its length. Don proved this theory of ramp mechanics beyond all doubt on Saturday afternoon as we took it in turns to jump and complete for the honours of the most distance travelled in airborne state. As a witness to this, we enlisted the aid of a non-competing friend who helped verify the length of the jumps. The friend, a local butcher's son from the next street, was cruelly given the moniker Eaglebeak by virtue of his generously endowed olfactory equipment. Don was a great dispenser of nicknames. Yeah, probably, again, not my best thing, calling this poor guy Eagle Beak. Although I don't think he might. I think he even called himself that at some point. Okay, maybe. I mean, you think this is big? You should have seen this guy's. He could open a can with his nose. Anyway, Eagle Beak's pride and joy was his new Japanese 35mm camera, and he was more into taking photos than racing motorbikes, and he recorded our stunts for posterity on film. Don's pride and joy was the new Japanese motorbike he had just bought himself, and he polished its chrome more often than his aunt and grandmother took the brasso to the brass taps and light switches on their house, which was very often. So that all the brass in the house was better polished than that of a naval training vessel. My motorbike was a 1939 model James that I bought for $5 from a junk dealer. Just like the proverbial junk dealer's dog, it wasn't pretty, but certainly had character. For an hour or so we put our machines through their paces, practicing up and down the nature strip, making small jumps and putting on display for Eagle Beak and his camera. By degrees the ramp jumping got a little more serious and the competition heated up a little. We started hitting the narrow ramp with a little more speed. The jumps became incrementally higher and longer. I thought I'd show Don that although my bike was a little long in the tooth, it was still a force to be reckoned with. It certainly had a throatier sound. Adrenaline pumping, I came roaring down the nature strip, going through the gears with the hand lever on the side and the petrol tank hitting the ramp with a fair amount of speed to produce the longest jump so far. All I lacked was a stadium full of people to stand on their seats and cheer. I felt like I had just sailed over 15 London buses. Don sat astride his machine, quietly eyeing the result and giving nothing away while I bathed in the imaginary accolades. I was just a little annoyed that there had been no girls walking by at the time. With a deadpan expression, he suggested we heighten the ramp a little more. We went back across the road and rummaged around the shed until we found a large iron weight which would give the short ramp a few extra inches in height. We didn't bother looking for a longer plank. We did a practice run or two to get the feel of the new line of trajectory. It didn't feel right, but I couldn't quite put my finger on why. Don had had enough of the practice runs and rode his bike 50 yards or more up the nature strip and turned to face the ramp. I think that's one of the pictures in there of me getting ready for the leap. Anyway, for a few seconds he sat there astride his machine in quiet consternation. I parked my own bike and waited with Eagle Beak, and then as we heard the tiny revving of his Suzuki, we knew that this was going to a dramatic upping of the ante. Eagle Beak scrambled for his camera and like a seasoned combat photographer threw himself on the ground to catch the best angle as Don suddenly released the clutch and came flat out down the nature strip in a blur of speed and concentration. You hear people say that certain dramatic events that they've been caught up in or witnessed to have felt to them as though the laws of time were suddenly altered and things get played out and replayed in the mind afterwards in slow motion. This was one of them for me. As Don's bike hit the ramp, you could see the suspension on his front wheel violently bottoming out. There was an instant change of his expression too, as the bike catapulted violently off the ramp. Now at this point, we have the actual photo that Eagle Beak took at this moment in time that Rob kept actually, and he sent it to me at some point. And I'll show you. There we go. That is that moment in time. see the picture there, we are going over the ramp. Quite the hero, hey? Evil Knievel.
Oh my gosh, Great Canyon, it's not.
But it's a good picture for back in those days.
Yes.
There's still the two rear vision mirrors and the two
Look
indicators.
at the face.
Okay. So there we go. Then from that point of view it was great. Don sailing over our heads, still hanging onto the handlebars like grim death, but the rest of his body becoming separated from the wayward machine. Eagle Beak managed to click the shutter with perfect timing, as you can see, as the photo later revealed with Don freeze-framed mid-air, a second from disaster and an image which, even now, I still find it hard to look at without laughing, as does this lovely companion of mine.
That's so good.
The disaster came when Don made contact with terra firma again. He certainly succeeded in getting a new record jump. and as a matter of fact he probably more than doubled or tripled my previous attempt. The landing though left a lot to be desired, since only the part of Don still in contact with the motorbike was his grip on the handlebars. It wasn't exactly what you would call a controlled landing. There were a few split seconds in which man and machine rolled and tumbled down the nature strip like two gladiators in a death struggle. You are so good with words, Rob. Where did you get that from? I don't know. Very good. Anyway, I'm impressed. Bits of grass, dirt, chrome and plastic flew up along the way. When they came to rest, Don's brand new Suzuki didn't look so brand new anymore. Don lay in a groaning heap, his hands cupped around his bruised manhood. Yeah, I landed on the tank. I do remember that. In fact, this is one of the events I do remember in graphic detail. Which had been badly punished upon coming to heavy contact with the petrol tank. Amazingly, apart from his pride, it was his only real injury. Some seconds passed while Eaglebeak and I wondered
Was he alive?
whether a phone call to the ambulance service might be well placed. Some minutes passed before Don could stand up straight enough to inspect the damage to his machine. After realising that Don wasn't in urgent need of paramedic help, Eaglebeak and I got a bad case of the giggles. Try as he might, Don didn't appear to see the funny side of it, especially when he saw the new simplified lines of his Suzuki, minus indicators and mirrors. For the rest of the afternoon there was a distinct strain in our relationship. Eaglebeak and I could hardly look at one another without cracking up. After that... That's a good memory, Rob. Thanks for recounting that. Anyway, after that day, Don's love affair with his new Suzuki and ramp jumping quickly waned. His love of speed, however, was far from over, and it wasn't long before he traded his small Suzuki in on something much more powerful with the jaw-dropping amount of acceleration. That's that other one. Oh, sorry, Don. That's which one? This is the new one he's talking about. That one. Kawasaki.
Look how little it is.
It's a 350 Avenger, two-stroke Avenger.
Yeah, I know, but look,
Look, it's about twice the size of the other one.
well, yes, I know, but look how tall you are compared to the bike. You must have got on and then sat down in an easy chair.
Well, back in those days, that was quite a powerful machine. It would do like 160k or more.
Oh, wow.
It was all in miles per hour then. Any bike that would do over 100 mile an hour on the ton was a decent bike, and I think that was good for about 110 or something. Anyway, this time a Kawasaki with an engine roughly triple the size of the one in his battle-scarred Suzuki, a bike that was a very dangerous toy in the hands of someone who tried breaking the sound barrier every time he stepped on the thing. The youthful cocktail which combines a love of speed, daredevilry and a competitive streak is, as anybody who reads a newspaper can tell you, a very dangerous one. Don had all of those ingredients in good measure. Since others among our circle of friends were buying themselves man-sized machines, a challenge was never far away. Everybody fancied their bikes over the competition. There were the usual boast stories of exaggeration, and it came down to 3 competing claims to be the quickest over a standing quarter mile. The only way to settle this was to pit machine against machine. The challenge was arranged. The only local street long and wide enough and straight enough to do the standing quarter mile had an intersection a third of the way down its length. Oh my God, what are we going to do? My friend Charlie and I volunteered for the job of being intersection lookouts. Should any cars approach the intersection, we would step into the roadway and flag down the bikes. Around 11 o'clock at night, when it was figured the streets would be empty, we made our way to the venue. Charlie and I positioned ourselves either side of the crossing road, nervously looking out for any approaching traffic. At the rear end of the street, a couple of 100 yards away, there was an unholy revving of engines, and then they were off. Fortunately, there were no approaching cars, and by this time the 3 bikes passed through the intersection. They were all doing close to 3 times the legal speed limit, and when it's all said and done, they wouldn't have a hope in hell of stopping anyway. The sound of 3 full-throated machines roaring down the quiet suburban street was mind-bending. Charlie had sprinted off down towards the finishing line at the other end of the street, while people in pyjamas and dressing gowns peered from behind curtains and doorways, wondering if a 707 had just crash-landed in their street. By the time they hit their brakes at the far end of the street, the racers had all been doing around a ton, as we called it at the time, a ton being 100 miles an hour, which is 162 kilometres an hour for those poor souls who have only had their brains programmed in metric. It might have so easily ended in disaster, but on this occasion, as on others, the numbers fell their way. Don's bike held the day, but probably had as much to do with his devil-may-care attitude as his machine. If Don, however, had an almost total disrespect for speed and the dangers which presented themselves in moving around suburban streets at ballistic speeds, then the countless other young gung-ho speed merchants before and after him, that all changed in a few fractions of a second one Saturday night. Perhaps for another TV marathon, Don made a fateful decision to head up to the local milk bar for a bottle of Coke. He was on his way home when a fellow in the next street and travelling in the opposite direction turned his station wagon into his driveway immediately in Don's path. The fellow, the father of three, and of the prettiest girl, three of the prettiest girls in a good 5-mile radius, may have even noticed the approaching headlight of Don's Kawasaki in the distance, without appreciating the fact that it was accelerating towards him at the kind of speed generally reserved for Formula One drivers and test pilots. By the time Don realised the possible consequences of an object moving at high velocity meeting another much larger and more or less stationary object, there was not a hell of a lot he could do about it except frantically squeezing his brakes, and realised that the encounter he was about to have with the station wagon wasn't going to be all that pretty. On the law of averages, Don's life should have been over at that instant. His couple of 100 kilos of Kawasaki hit the rear passenger door of the Ford with enough force to push it about a foot inside the car. As luck would have it, the driver was the only occupant of the vehicle. The front wheel of the motorbike ended up wrapped around its engine, snapping the chrome exhaust manifolds in the process. Yeah, that bike was history after that. When Don momentarily regained consciousness some minutes later, he was lying on his back on the nature strip, looking up at the sea of faces. He registered a red flashing light somewhere near him before he lost consciousness again. He said later he thought he'd blacked out in those milliseconds before the impact. If so, it may have saved his life by relaxing his muscles at a critical moment. The impact had catapulted him skyward over the top of the station wagon, and gravity had pulled him down again in a remarkable piece of good fortune onto the grassy nature strip. I remember in the ambulance, because I sort of woke up and I remember going down the street, and then I remember waking up on the grass, and then I sort of off, and then I was in the ambulance, and I said, how's the bike? And the guy said, mate, your bike's a write-off, it's half inside, the car. And he said, you have got no idea how lucky you are. There are so many of these events
Was
where...
there helmets back then?
Yeah, we had helmets on. But he said in so many cases like this, it's both the bike and the rider that end up inside the car. Yeah. And of course they're usually fatal. And he said the fact that just the way it made contact and whatever it was, instead of you going into the vehicle, you went over the top of the vehicle, is why you're still here talking to me. So yeah, that was close. So,
yeah.
So anyway, so there you go. That's probably enough. So yeah, great times, Rob. Thanks very much for sharing all that. So you didn't realise I had such a colourful childhood, yeah?
No, you vandal.
So how does that make you feel about me? Better, worse, the same? Could just confirm your worst fears?
No different.
No different, okay. Yeah. So there you go, thank you, Robert. Now, I guess, what about a sequel? I think you said it took 25 years to put this together. 25 years might be a bit long for another edition.
Well, he's got from then to here, from there to now.
That's right. So your travels, lots of exciting things that happened in your travels overseas. There's probably even a few sort of B-reel events that we could cover. I remember, for example, one of the things we used to do, which was great fun, that wasn't mentioned in the book, lots of things I guess that weren't, was our thing that we made up, the rope trick. Do you remember the rope trick, Rob, that we used to do outside our houses? What the rope trick was all about was we'd sit on each side of the road, sort of crouched down, and as a car came along, we would pretend to pull a rope, like as though we were holding a rope across the road.
So there was no rope?
There was no rope, but it was like, the idea was to make it look like we're picking up the rope.
Break.
That's right, and so the idea was that the person coming down the road would see the two kids go like this, and with about I don't know, probably what, a 50-50 success rate. Half of them could just see it was a couple of dickheads and went straight through, but about every second
You're very imaginative, the two of you.
thought it was a rape. And I mean, even if it was a rape, why would you bother? You'd just go through it, I would have thought. But anyway, and there were a few that were really successful, but there was one in particular. It was a Zephyr, because this is back in the 50s.
I know Zephyrs, my dad had one.
Yeah, it had it. This one was a green one. I remember it really well. It's one of those moments that sort of does come back quite clearly. And it had big fins, and a big grill, big silver grill.
Yep.
Anyway, this guy came along and we did the rope thing, and he hit the skids, and the Zephyr sort of did a bit of a fishtail and skidded, and I think there might have even been a bit of smoke, off the tyres.
Oh,
with the,
he didn't
on the
hit
road.
anything.
No, he just sort of fishtailed and sort of stopped in front of us, and of course we thought it was hysterical, and we just took off. I don't know whether he kept going or took after us or whatever it was, because I could see it was like a young guy, like a 18,
Vandals you.
20-year-old.
Kids do this.
Totally harmless. There was nothing.
No, they're not totally harmless. He could have run one of you over.
Well, he could have got out of the car and clocked us. That wouldn't have been good for us too, I
Actually,
guess.
that would have been really good. May have changed your attitude somewhat.
Yeah. So there you go, stuff like that. Oh, that would have been, well, what's before we had bikes? That would have been like 13, 14, something like that, I suppose.
Holy shit.
I don't know. And there was another, what else was there that there were lots of things actually. One other thing that I got to congratulate or thank your father for was another moment where I went a little bit wayward, and I'm not sure why you even got involved, because you're probably too responsible to be involved with this, but somehow you were. I had this idea that I wanted to collect the badges off the back of vehicles, the little metal badges that they have on the, the rear. It might be FJ Holden or, as I say, Zephyr or something. And we'd go at night with screwdrivers and just prise these little badges off. Didn't actually damage the car. I mean,
Well, it did, because you took the badge.
we took the badge and left a little, couple of holes in the back of the car.
Yeah.
Anyway, I thought, these things are just there for the taking. I'll get a collection. I know this was flawed. Okay, I accept it was flawed. I learned to err in my ways and everything. Anyway, and so I started to collect quite a collection of these from the cars around the street. Anyway, I'm not sure how we found out, whether somebody saw us. I don't think Robert would have told his parents about it. I don't think that's the sort of thing he would do. But somehow or other, his parents found out about it. I don't remember my parents again ever finding out about it. And I remember being called to talk to Robert's father, and Robert's father gave us a real lecture about. I can't remember the exact, but it did have it was something to do with there are like sliding door paths in your life, and this could be, if you take this path where you decide that taking things that don't belong to you is fun and whatever, that has a very bad long-term outcome, or you can take this path where you don't do shit like that and your life will be a lot better, and I want you to have a good think about it, which was very wise words, because I did actually think about that and thought, that was pretty damn stupid. And in fact, I think I even went back and tried to put some of them back on the vehicles. I couldn't find all the vehicles, and they didn't always go back the correct way. But I did. That was a bit of a light bulb moment that wasn't a good idea, and so I didn't really do anything. That was probably the last sort of really bad thing I did. But had I not been brought to account by your father, so thank you, Robert's father, it may well have not been good. So there you go. Anyway, so there's plenty more stories, B-roll stories for a sequel, perhaps. Have a think about it, right? But not 25 years, hey. So there you go.
That's good.